Now I would like to introduce our MC for this evening, and I have to say it's with great pleasure I introduce him because he's a local man. He went to school in Curran, and when I phoned him, I have to say he had no hesitation whatsoever. He said, yeah, I'd be very happy to be involved. And when I was giving him directions, which I didn't actually need to do, he was saying the way that the last time I think he was here, this was a disco. I didn't like to ask how long ago that was, Richard, but it's not today or yesterday. So he's very familiar with the area. But anyhow, for those of you who don't know Richard Curran, I'll just give you a bit of background, other than the fact that he's from County Monaghan and that we're delighted to have him. Richard is obviously our broadcaster and a journalist. He was previous deputy editor for the Sunday Business Post, and prior to that he was editor for the Irish Independent Business. Richard is also the presenter on Dragon's Den, and I believe there's a new series on the way, so we're looking forward to seeing that. And he has commented on RT and on radio on a number of different issues. And I think, Richard, probably one of the things that you're best known for is Future Shock, the property crash. Your foresight at that time was pretty clear, so I'm just wondering, have you got a tip for the new Pope? Perhaps not. And I have to say, Richard, this is my closing point on introducing you, but at the time, about 5 years ago, I asked Richard if he'd do a profile for the CarmanCross.ie website, and he was more than happy to oblige at that time. And he was telling me in that one of the things he remembers when he was at St. Joseph's National School on Farney Street, which is the street we were on, you could get a bag of chips for 5p. Now, I don't know where we've gone wrong since, Richard, but things have increased a little bit, but maybe you could throw some light on it. So without further ado, I'd like to thank very much all the participants today, because they've all given their time freely and generously, and I'm much appreciated. But I'd like to introduce Richard Curran, your MC for this evening.
Thank you very much, Claire, for that. I will confess that the nightclub days were the 1980s. We came here and we danced, if you could call it dancing, to a whole lot of Rosie and Meatloaf and all the rest of it. So it's funny actually queuing up in the car park out there to come into the nightclub back in the 1980s, and then coming in here today to talk about e-commerce and the wonderful surroundings of the Newmore. You know, how the world has changed and how many things have changed in lots of good ways and lots of interesting ways, although the nightclub was pretty good too. I was just going to say a few words. It was mentioned there about jobs and about the Future Shock programme that I made in 2007. I'm not sure, Claire, if it was foresight or just complete naivety at sticking my neck out as far as I did to say what I did in that programme, because I was quite shocked actually. That was the future shock for me at the reaction that I got to it, both positive and negative. It seemed to divide the country at the time. People felt that the boom was going to go on forever in relation to property, and then other people felt, oh no, it's all going to go horribly wrong. But I think it probably fueled a bit of debate, which was no harm. In relation to the recent years, and a lot of people talk about the recession and the downturn, I'm not going to go on about that, but one phrase that people say is, they say, it's as if the country has taken a step backwards, a 10-year step backwards in relation to lots of things. And I'm not so sure that that's true. I think that's a very pessimistic way of looking at it. And for a couple of reasons, and one of them feeds into this evening. If you look at the 15 years before things started to go wrong here, I think in that 15 years the country probably took 30 or 40 years of steps forward. So if in some aspects of the economy and the society we've had to take a bit of a step back, and maybe even a 10-year step back in some things, then that's actually in that context not such a bad thing. It's a difficult and a painful thing, but perhaps in a way we have an opportunity to rebuild and start again and get it right the next time. But one of the things that has not taken a step back of any kind is technology and the internet and its role in business and e-commerce and transactions online and the public and the consumer's appetite to do transactions online. There's been no steps backwards there, and if anything, it has just continued its exponential growth. So what I would say to any of you here who is a retailer, for example, if you're open for business today and you're here today, I would say, well done to you. You deserve a pat on the back. And lots of people probably wouldn't give it to you, because retailing has taken such a really front line in the difficulties that have beset the country and the economy over the last few years. Retailing has been incredibly tough. So if you're here, you're still standing and you're in business, well done. You're obviously very good at what you do, you care about what you do, and you know your business. But another reason why I'd say well done is because you're here. Because that suggests to me that you're open to thinking about new ways of how you do your business. And one of the things we've all had to learn, anybody involved in business over the last few years, is people have had to look at doing things differently, how to grow their business, rethinking how they used to do things, and looking for new revenue streams and new ways of doing it. I suppose sometimes the response to that can be a very simple thing, sometimes it can be a complicated thing. I don't know if you ever heard the story about the guy that owned the shop on the main street of the town, and he opened up his shop one morning and he noticed that right next door on the left-hand side was a brand new shop, a competitor shop, and your man had a big sign over his door saying, lowest prices in town. So the guy says, oh geez, I'm in trouble here, I'm going to have to do something. So the next day he came in to open the shop, and he realised that on the right-hand side of him was another rival shop that just opened that morning, and they had a big signpost and a big poster saying, biggest discounts. And he said, geez, I really am in trouble now, what am I going to do? So what he did was he put a sign over his shop and it said, main entrance. So sometimes thinking about doing things differently can be very simple, or sometimes a bit more complicated. What I would say in relation to IT and e-commerce and its potential role in relation to jobs, and I don't necessarily want to talk about jobs that much, but I've had some experience on Dragon's Den, as Claire mentioned, and we have a new series coming out. It kicks off on Sunday night, and I think it's going to be a great series. We've all the filming done, we're just finishing it off over the next few weeks, and we've done a junior Dragon's Den this time. Dragon's Den as a programme formula began in Japan, and the rights to Dragon's Den are owned by Sony. But in this part of the world, people associated an awful lot with the BBC because the BBC made it a tremendous success, and then 5 years ago it came to Ireland. But it had never been tried in any of the 15 or 16 countries that Dragon's Den has run in to do a junior Dragon's Den. So we have 2 episodes at the end of it this year. We've 8 ordinary episodes, and then we've 2 episodes of Junior Dragon's Den, which is school kids. Some of them are as young as 13, coming into the den with a business idea, doing a pitch, facing questions, and see if they can actually get, it's a financial bursary that they can be awarded. And the quality and determination and inventiveness and creativity and understanding of business that those kids have is absolutely fantastic. And it's a really uplifting thing to actually watch it. And I think that's something that augurs well for the future of the country. But one of the things that I've noticed in Dragon's Den when it comes to IT and e-commerce, we used to get a lot of startup companies coming in, and the guy would come in and he'd say, I've got a great idea for a business, it's a website. And the website would be the business idea as a startup. But increasingly what we're now seeing is people coming into the den who already have a business, which is a traditional non-website business, and it might be profitable, it might be doing okay, it might be growing a little bit, it might be growing well, and they've decided that they want to get into e-commerce and they want to open up the internet as a new strand for their business. And I think that traditionally people felt, firstly, maybe a bit intimidated by the whole idea of online. Secondly, if they had an existing retail business, they felt, well, that's not what I do, I don't know anything about it. And thirdly, they often felt that it was something for big business. You know, I run a small business, I'm a small retailer, I'm a medium-sized company, I won't be able to compete in relation to that, I don't know anything about it. But the costs of access to the internet, the costs of setting up an online part of what you do and having an online presence, and an e-commerce where you're actually doing transactions as well, has come down. And it has become more accessible, and more small businesses are seriously looking at it, and I think it's something that, you know, many of them will stand to benefit from, and I think it's a great testament that you're here, because obviously you're thinking about that as well. One other thing I'd say, Joan mentioned about the action plan for jobs. We got a bit of good news today on the jobs front. The CSO figures showed that we actually had a net increase in employment in 2012. It was the first year since 2008. Small bit of good news. I think it was just over 1,200 jobs, but it's still a step in the right direction. But one of the things where I think we went wrong, we made tremendous progress in Ireland in this economy in developing an entrepreneurial culture, something we didn't really have in the 70s and 80s. Maybe in some of the border counties, I suppose, around here we were fairly entrepreneurial, but in a lot of other places we didn't have the most enterprising culture. But in the late 90s, I think the country made tremendous progress in beginning to develop that enterprise culture. And then in the early 2000s, it all went horribly wrong because we got sidetracked and distracted and all thought there were quicker and faster ways of making money, and a lot of that went wrong. But I actually think that businesses are now starting to go back to that. People are now beginning to think about setting up businesses and think in an entrepreneurial way. And I think in the last 2 years in particular, when people got over the shock of what happened, we are back on the road to developing a good, solid enterprise culture in Ireland, from very small businesses, the man with the van, 1 or 2 people with a website which could be located anywhere. And I think that's a very positive development that we should all acknowledge and nurture as well. And the other thing is, in relation to the action plan for jobs, one of the really big difficulties and painful aspects of what's happened in the economy in Ireland has been regional differences. Some companies in the export sector, some companies in Dublin continue to do incredibly well, and many of the smaller towns and villages and country areas around the place have really suffered badly in the downturn, and that's a big gap that's still there. But the thing about technology and about an online presence is you can be anywhere, and if you can create jobs for your business, just even a couple of jobs through an online presence, they're jobs that can go into rural areas, small towns, villages, up and down the country, as long as you have the infrastructure and those things. And I think, as Claire pointed out, in County Monaghan a lot of that has improved, and maybe that's something that will be debated and discussed later on as well.